I'm back! Oh shit, what happened to this place? Why is it on fire? Man, you leave a room for a year and I guess it just sets itself on fire. Well, that sucks. Anyhow, I'm back. I'm better than ever. I ended up making one of these videos in 2022. I ended up forgetting making one of these for 2023, and wow, I'm kicking myself because that was an incredibly formative year for my taste in media. So, for those who don't know, in the past 2 years, I've got really into movies, got depressed, got therapy. Wow, this stuff can work wonders. I got an autism diagnosis, and generally, I feel like I've become far more confident in who I am, my knowledge, my strengths, and the sort of direction I want to head in. And yeah, not having a video for last year kind of feels like I've shot myself in the foot, because there was just so many things which I think really shaped me. But that's enough yapping. Let's get on with the show. So, since I didn't make a video last year, I wanted to briefly touch upon the stuff I didn't get a chance to talk about. This stuff really shaped me, it really stuck out to me, and I just generally think this stuff deserves more attention. So, you'll see some ones that are less known here. 5 favourites from 2023. Number 5, Brave Animated Series. This is a deceptively cutesy looking art style which hides a surprisingly morbid story. Yeah, this is one about systemic violence. It sounds stupid, but I absolutely love how this story does things. I really like Morwan. He's the absolute GOAT. And yeah, if I'm able to, I really want to make a video about this at some point because, God, it's so cool. It's so cool and so underrated. Why did Netflix have to take it off? I really want to see season 2. Number 4, The Magnus Archives. This is a superbly done horror fiction podcast. Seriously, just stick with this and enjoy the ride. I don't want to talk about it and I don't want to spoil it too much, but let's just say how do I even put it? Not everything's as it seems, I guess. It's so much fun, seriously good. I still need to finish it though. I ended up forgetting to see the rest of it midway through the final season. Oops. Number 3, Mog's Christmas. This is a delightfully charming feel-good short film done by the ever-talented Lupus Films. I've literally just got here, I would die for Mog, but yeah, Mog is just the best little guy, just a little friend, and yeah, I'm forever happy that the BBC seem to be either funding or at least encouraging Lupus Films to make stuff yearly for their Christmas specials. Number 2, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. God, this is a really special story. It hits a lot of points that I can't really convey easily. It's very self-reflective, very humble, but it has a lot of distressing themes, so I would recommend checking out some of the content warnings just in case. I just really like seeing Jim Broadbent in this role as the main star, because he really gets to flex his range, and this film is incredibly underrated. I am surprised I have not seen anyone talk about it. Number 1, Sable. I don't think that I can fully capture why this game hit me so hard, but it came at literally the perfect point in my life where it evokes the exact same feelings that I was experiencing in life at the time, where I was going to university and I was starting to feel like I was getting into the groove of things. It really emphasizes that feeling of leaving the nest for the first time as a young adult, whether that's leaving just to live on your own, leaving to travel, leaving for school. it's really... It's not the most mechanically in-depth game, but it doesn't need to be, because so long as you are interested in exploring the world, interested in engaging with the characters and the plot lines, you will have a blast. I will say that sometimes it crashed and had weird bugs, but on the whole, very, very fun, very, very enjoyable. Highly, highly recommend it. And I also like the order that I approached things in Sable, because Sable herself felt like she almost had a bit of an arc of maturing and reflecting and getting a bit wiser as the story goes on. The ending, I think, really emphasized that, at least for me, because the mask I chose was the climber mask, the lizard-looking one. And I think it just really encapsulated my feelings of the game, and I love that little monologue before you put on the mask. And I'm assuming it's different from every single different mask that you get, which I just think is so, so cool. Okay, and here are a couple of shout-outs I want to put on the screen right now. All of these were really, really fun. So, yeah, go check those out. And now, with enough of that... And yeah, with that, I have done with my actual full-on script. I've now got about 20 pages of notes of rambling about things I saw this year. So, forgive me if this is a long video. I'm doing this for me. Have fun. Undertale. This is a game that I have been a fan of for literal years, almost a decade, but I have never fully played it. So yeah, despite being a massive fan of Toby Fox's work and generally just being in the fandom, I never have experienced myself playing the game to the end, because I got terrified by the final boss, the neutral ending boss. But man, I'm so glad I ended up going through with the pacifist and the neutral run, because Toby Fox writes characters, music, dialogue, jokes, and a gameplay experience which just... it's just so much fun, and you really can tell how much this guy thinks about how a player would experience this stuff. How to best make the twists and reveals feel really fun, and he always seems to know everything that a player would do. Like, even really stupid stuff, like if you go to Papyrus's house whilst Undyne is chasing you, Papyrus will actually be there, I'm pretty sure. It's actually insane the levels of detail this man goes into. I really, really enjoyed the dinner date scene with Sans. I think that is a really enlightening bit about who this guy is, how he's kind of accepted his reality and the idea that he can't go back to whatever he once considered home, and how he's kind of almost convincing you to do the same. Man, what a fascinating game. And yeah, there was a reason I was playing Undertale, because I wanted to play Undertale Yellow. This is one of the best fan games I have ever seen. Undertale Yellow is an absolute labour of love. I've been vaguely aware of it since it was quite new, but actually getting to play it was such a cool experience, and the fact that it was free, it just blows my mind. The Yellow team are incredibly, incredibly talented, and I really hope some of these guys end up pursuing game development or other forms of media, because my god, they just knocked it out of the park. And I'm also so glad that this game has a run button. That is one of my biggest complaints about Undertale, is you walk at the pace of a snail and you can't change it. You are just stuck walking incredibly slowly. But yeah, just in general, I love the vibe of Undertale Yellow. The music is on point, and if there's any compliments that a fan game can get, I think getting your music praised just like Toby Fox's is great. but I also love how each of the routes utilize Clover as the protagonist as this kind of vessel to explore different ideas of justice, whether that's justice for everyone, a selfish sort of vengeful type of justice, or even more sort of unclear, uncertain forms of justice. My main complaint about the game is I'm not really that hot on Dolv. He is really just dropped the moment you leave the ruins, and he generally just feels like the least explored character, particularly in terms of the main characters. He kind of feels a bit sidelined and separate, which isn't necessarily bad, but what he gets is minimal, and you just sort of see him mope a lot. And I don't know. I feel like I might be a bit harsh on Dolv, because this was the first character that they were creating, so obviously they would have more time to polish the other ones. But I don't know, I just think he could have been improved a bit more, but that's fine. The music and visuals were really strong. I really liked the true pacifist ending. The only other thing that I'd say is that the fights aren't easy. I've seen some people say they're really difficult or they're really easy. They're not easy, and I think that saying, oh, you just need to practice, doesn't fully capture my experience, because particularly the final pacifist fight felt very difficult. It was very much chipping away and dying and chipping away and dying until I eventually kind of got into the groove of things. But the fact that I had this with this fight, the Dance Dance Revolution fight, and the Axis fight was a little less than ideal. But, you know, I think it was a fun level of difficulty. I'm glad that I am not trying the genocide run, because I would suck at it. Next up, the Obra Dinn. The return of the Obra Dinn was the first game that I think has really hooked me in a good long time. It feels like you're a time-traveling Sherlock Holmes having to solve this mystery and trying to decide everyone's fates. The ability to analyze scenes with a fine-tooth comb to try and figure things out is so satisfying, particularly when you get the fates right, and particularly when you sort of piece things together. You feel so cool. Practically all of the actual fates were easy enough to deduct, I think. There were a couple which I had to look up, but the majority were easy enough to understand. It was mainly just trying to find the phrasing and the person's name that makes sense. There was one that really eluded me for a while. I wasn't really sure. Okay, I'm fairly sure they died this way, but it didn't seem to be working. But when I did eventually get it, and everything just clicked because I'd viewed a scene from a different angle, I felt so proud of myself. It was so cool. I love the aesthetic. Lucas Pope is an absolutely incredible game designer. I do not know how he does it. Okay, in this theme of games that have really shaped me this year, Outer Wilds. So, this thing has dominated my life since just under a month ago, when I began this in November. It's, God, how do you describe Outer Wilds? It's an absolutely crazy ride. You get this feeling of scientific curiosity as you play. You're in this giant, scary, strange, but ultimately understandable universe. And the amount of trial and error, the amount of just sheer random shit that you need to try just to see if it works, just to see if you can figure things out in a slightly different way, it really gave me a sense of purpose. And I know that it can seem kind of overwhelming. Sometimes it really does feel like you're bashing your head against a brick wall. But the planets and the different tasks within the planets that you can try out all feel different enough that you can eventually come to the realization that, oh, this is how I can play this different scene and get a better outcome or get some knowledge I didn't have before. One thing that I found really interesting about Outer Wilds was there was a point near the end of the game where I felt like I'd basically exhausted everything I could do. All of the knowledge that I didn't really know how to use, I wasn't really certain what to do. It made me feel like I knew so much about this world, but I also knew so little, and these few small things were just this roadblock that I just couldn't overcome. This non-linear narrative that the game has going on is a bit difficult to fully... It's hard to fully know which direction that you're supposed to go. Sometimes you get signposted to your next objective, but particularly near the end, you do have to find a certain number of things in a very particular way if you want to utilize things to the best potential and get to the ending. It's a game that feels like equal parts very humbling, but also encouraging you to dive into the unknown and figure these things out, even if it is a terrifying experience. It utilizes its game-like mechanics to kind of really make you think in the mindset of, if I die, I can just come back to this. It's okay. And I really like that. It's also just, oh man, that ending is a lot. I've got a video which is me recording my first time experiencing that ending. It's a lot, but yeah, I don't really know how to explain it. It felt like I was on the precipice of sink or swim. That this run would define whether my character lived or died. And treating it with that level of importance really made it that much more satisfying to come to the end, even if that unknown was terrifying. I know that Solon has a really good quote in the game talking about how I used to think as a child the universe was strange and sinister and out to get me. They specifically mention the eye of the universe in that. But I love that by the end of the game, even though there are these oddities, there are these things which feel sinister, they ultimately get revealed to be natural in their own weird way. Like Dark Bramble, despite being this weird interdimensional seed which is bigger on the inside, ultimately it's just a weed. And the Quantum Moon, it's ultimately just a rock. It's a rock that disappears, sure, but it doesn't... It's not completely unknowable, and it's sort of demystifying that kind of eldritchness. And it's so cool. And oh man, the music too. The music near the end, the piano, the space theme. There's just so many good tracks in this. I legit don't know how you even start trying to design a game like this. It's actually incredible. Ninjago's Dragons Rising. Man, Ninjago's Dragons Rising is amazing. It has basically reinvented Ninjago's world, its characters, and it has seriously pushed it forwards onto a new generation. Like, I think that when you have to do a big swing and a big shift like this, I think that you really do need to do something like this. The way I've put it in my notes is that it has allowed it to get more narrative and artistic sauce to be put on this meal, which is stupid, but it perfectly summarizes my feelings to this. The art of this new version of Ninjago, with all of the realms smashed together, allows for so much more vibrancy, so much more varied character design, and I just absolutely love it. I think that this is a great step forwards, where we're breaking down the boundaries, breaking down the rules that we thought we knew, and suddenly replacing them with this whole new paradigm. I also really like how it's clear the writers and the creators of this show have a clear vision and a clear story that is in multiple seasons that they want to discuss. It really surprised me how much I liked Sora in particular. Her story in Imperium subverts so much about what Ninjago typically does in the past. It allows for so much discussion around identity, and it feels like it's right on the edge of kind of being queer, or at least having an analogy which could be read as queer. Sora has changed her name, she's found family, and she's rebelling against the system, which is just completely refusing to acknowledge her individuality. It's surprisingly powerful. I didn't expect Ninjago to take such a bold swing, but this is exactly what the series needed. Season 2 has also done so much for Lloyd, for Raz, for Aaron. I made a video about Raz and Aaron not fairly recently. I did it after Season 2 Part 1. And I'm so excited to see where that will continue, because Season 2 Part 2, oh, there are so many well-written scenes in Season 2 Part 2. I think that talk where Raz is basically convincing Aaron, listen, Lloyd isn't going to teach you, but you know who could teach you? And then Aaron's like, wait, you want to teach me? Nuh-uh. And then by the end of the season, Aaron has become so desperate and so, disillusioned with how Lloyd teaches that he is willing to try and use Raz to get to find his parents. There is so much future potential in the way that Aaron's going to be fleshed out and the way that Sora is going to be fleshed out, and I'm sure plenty more characters will be fleshed out. And seeing Aaron diverge from this traditional path that has been kind of carved out by the previous protagonist is so awesome to me. It's such creative storytelling, and the way that they're using the legacy characters too also feels really, really fun. Kai in particular has been getting some really cool action moments. I like how his arrival is enough to kind of help fend off Nox a bit. It's so cool. I absolutely love it. I don't really have any complaints about either season. I enjoyed the tournament setting. I enjoyed Imperium. The Blood Moon was a bit hit or miss for me. I enjoyed the Blood Moon setting. Wasn't the biggest fan of the whole Sorceress and Mysterium stuff. But I am really enjoying how they're handling all the plot lines. Particularly when it comes to these multi-season arcs, which they're not trying to force more information in than they need to. I'm sure that things like the Source Dragon's involvement in the story, and Raz's master, and whatever they're doing with Jay, seriously, I'm so curious to find out what are they cooking up with that guy. I also think that there's a lot that we're not being revealed about Zane, because the way that they've reintroduced him so matter-of-factly, but there's still that kind of massive chunk of time where we have no idea where he was, no idea what he was doing. That really interests me, and I think if the leaks and the sets revealed for Season 3 are any indication, I'm so excited for the future of this series. In my 2022 video, I was kind of tepidly enjoying myself, but here I'm wholeheartedly excited for the future of this little Lego show, man. It is so cool. Alright, Arcane Season 2. Arcane is one of those shows which I can't really easily put my feelings into words, but in a different way from things which I just kind of adore. I was always a fan of the show, even if I don't rank it as an all-time favourite, but there were definitely a few elements which prevent me for saying that Season 2 is wholeheartedly, as good as Season 1. TB Skyen has put it in a really good way that Arcane will tend to sacrifice depth for breadth. I think this feels especially true with Season 2, with the sheer number of characters, plot points, and ideas that they're trying to juggle. Like, we've got Kate's grief and then becoming of a kind of dictator-like figure. There's Ambessa, there's Mel's entire identity getting kind of wiped clean almost, and then her having to rebuild the pieces of that. I think that Ambessa, Jace, Victor, Singed, all of those characters get really, really fleshed out, but I feel a bit weird about how we conclude the story with Vi, Heimerdinger, and Jinx in particular. I think there could have been a bit more connective tissue, and just in general, I think this season was really trying to focus more on the arcane, more on the action, more on the release. If season 1 was the build-up, this was the release of the power, the fighting, the war, the violence. And in some ways it worked, and in other ways I think it really, really swung and missed. I enjoyed myself. I don't want to discredit this, but it does take a lot of the elements which I enjoyed in Season 1 and doesn't really conclude them. Season 1 is quite a self-contained season as it is, but, for example, a lot of the Piltover Zorn stuff didn't really get the focus that I kind of was hoping for. Savika is a weird case where the beginning episodes really sort of hinted that she was going to have a greater importance than she actually might have had. Like, she was cool as a sort of right hand to Jinx, but beyond that, she didn't really get much to do. Like, I enjoy all her scenes. I don't think that they did anything wrong with her. It's just we didn't conclude some of the stuff I kind of wish we did. But I have no ill will towards the creators of this show. They did absolutely fantastically. Visually, an absolute treat. Episode 7 was superb. But I do get this feeling that there was some sacrificial lambs almost. Particularly Heimerdinger. It felt like they just kind of... if they had to drop someone and not give them the focus they needed, it was going to be Heimerdinger. Like, Singed could do quite a lot with his more minimal scenes. Warwick became much more prominent, much more focused. And I also feel like Mel... I'm not the biggest fan of how literally everything that Season 1 had built up about who she was basically gets completely erased because she is now involved with this Black Rose magical stuff, which is fine, but it severely limits how you can use what Mel used to be. It turns her a lot more from a politician into more of a wolf-like figure, as Ambessa says, and I'm not entirely sure I vibe with it. I think that there were some really great scenes with her, some really great scenes with Jace, but yeah, Arcane Season 2 is a messy series that I can't fully say, oh yeah, I absolutely loved it, 10 out of 10. I enjoyed it, I had fun, but it didn't quite hit the spot that I was expecting it to. Okay, there's quite a few for this bit. This is kind of my segment for Karate Kid, Cobra Kai, Rocky, and Megalobox Season 1. All of these different films, shows, kind of occupy that great punching, shonen-y, fighting goodness part of my brain. They all really scratch that itch, and they all kind of explore these similar themes in very different ways. Karate Kid felt like it was a lot about discipline. Rocky was more about proving yourself to the world. Megalobox was about getting to dance at the sort of height of the human experience, with Joe and Yuri having this bout that they wanted to achieve so that they could kind of realize their ambitions. And I can't really pinpoint one thing about Cobra Kai because... And I just can't be pretentious about it because it's just so absurd and so over the top, but it's also so much fun. Like, literally, you can't help but love it. The absurdity of the violence, seeing Johnny and the other characters all grown up. The characters of Silver and Chosen are legit some of the most entertaining, funniest characters that I've met this year. Like, seriously, if you do see Cobra Kai, watch it with an open mind, because there is a legit, really interesting, really bombastic, crazy story in the midst of all the team drama, the very kind of on-the-nose writing, and this absurd karate war that kind of just escalates and escalates and snowballs and snowballs. It's just a blast, man. Karate Kid was great. I like how, comparatively to Cobra Kai, Karate Kid is so much more grounded. It feels a lot of Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel the discipline involved in karate and how violence shouldn't be necessary. I think that it sort of highlights just how important it can be to kind of center yourself, to find a sort of core that you can develop, whether that's kind of just, it's just sort of it's a lot more spiritual than I expected, I think. I also love how much it humanizes Mr. Miyagi, because as much as you can take the valid criticism of it's kind of pushing this Eastern mysticism angle, it also doesn't shy away from showing a pretty sad side to Mr. Miyagi's life, of him being in the war, his wife and son being in an internment camp, and his wife dying during labor. Like, that is not exactly that's a little bit more complicated than just saying he's a poor stereotype. And there are definitely aspects about Karate Kid, which, particularly Cobra Kai, do have a bone to pick, and it picks it apart and it plays with it in interesting ways. It's tough to nail down, but I've come to really enjoy myself with these more sort of meathead, for lack of a better word, fights and sort of explorations of how do people interact with these kind of more violent tendencies. How does Rocky pull himself up from rock bottom, basically? Like, he is a character basically who is past his prime, who lives in a way which is pretty miserable, but he does manage to rise to the occasion. And then there's Megalobox, which is an absurdly unfair world, an absurdly cruel world, and Joe manages to beat that long enough to achieve a fulfilling match with Yuri. And I'm so curious to see how Season 2 will continue this, because at the end of it seemed almost too happy of an ending. It was such a... It felt like it had a bow on everything, and I'm just so curious and fascinated to see where might this world go next. Like, there's still the plot threads of Megalobox gears being used for military use, and of course there's also the upcoming Megalobox tournament. So I'm really curious to see whether we're going to be following Joe or whether we'll follow a new character. I'm fascinated, man. I'm so excited for it. Alright, next up is Adventure Time. Now, Adventure Time took up a massive portion of the front half of this year, and it's kind of insane to me that I started watching, or rewatching more accurately, all of this. The reason I decided to take up this monumental task was I was fairly sure I'd seen all of Adventure Time, but I wanted to make sure I'd seen all of it, so I did the logical thing of watching the entire thing, and I'm so happy I did. This is such a whimsical, fun, but also varied tone of a world where it really feels like anything can happen. I really love how it goes from, in Season 1 and 2, some of the most buck-wild, absurd jokes to becoming far more character-fueled in its storytelling and far more abstract and weird. Like, compare an episode like Abstract, for example, the one where Jake's kind of having to grapple with this new form of his. Compare that to, like, one of the really early episodes where Finn and Jake are, I don't know, going after a fucking... They're gonna try and beat up a barn. Like, it's worlds apart, but when you're watching the show, the growth does feel kind of natural in a way. Like, it feels like the world is growing alongside the audience and alongside Finn. And I think that Finn's growth is one of the best parts of this series. The comet, particularly, feels like a kind of solidification of this identity that Finn has as someone who is reflective and someone who is growing and learning and becoming more defined as a person, whilst never straying from that core of being a good kid with a good heart. In terms of the writing, some of the best was done by Adam Muto and Rebecca Sugar. They never failed to deliver some absolute greatness. Pretty much peak fiction. Absolutely love Simon and Marceline. Fionna and Cake was also a really interesting addition, as it showed that the show was able to target the grown-up audience that grew up with the show, and it really kind of felt like a very natural movement forwards. I will admit that the specials didn't hit me nearly as hard as I know they hit other people. I had fun with them, but they felt like side quests, for lack of a better word. But Fionna and Cake did feel like a step forwards, and I particularly like there's a scene near the end where Simon is talking to a therapist, and he's basically being told it's a cycle of forgetting and remembering things, making mistakes and improving from mistakes. And I really liked that. I think it really felt true to life. It felt like a very similar statement to how I will sometimes feel. And I really liked that. Okay, Carol and the End of the World. This is an incredibly underrated show with a cast of characters that I can't really compare to any other animated show. So, the premise of this is that there is a meteor in the sky. It's going to drop on the Earth in 12 months. And then it just kind of lets the characters just exist. And it feels like a very real, frank look about, how would people react, similar to something like COVID, where suddenly the world is different, you no longer have the same structures, the same order, the same level of reservedness that you would need normally. Some people would go up to all sorts of things, they would do all sorts of crazy stuff, while others just kind of lose their way. Some people have these kind of wild and dramatic dreams, but then others just don't. And that's why I love Carol Cole as a protagonist, because we are following the most simple person ever, and I love that. Carol is a really reserved, really monotone, really kind of simple, closed-off person, and she just seeks that genuine human connection of talking with others to have friends. And I really like that. It's not a character you'd typically follow in an apocalypse show, and I think the reason it hit so hard for me was I was one of the people who during the COVID lockdowns didn't really do a ton. I played games, I watched YouTube, I didn't really improve myself or go out of my way to do things which I had not done before. And I think that this slow and contemplatedness really adds to this show's appeal to me. There were a few weird episodes which didn't really mesh with this reading and generally what I enjoyed about the show. There was an episode basically dedicated to a lie. Like, you know at this point in the story, this entire story is fabricated. You know it's not real. And it feels like the punchline, or like the setup to a punchline, but we never get that punchline. So maybe it would make more sense on rewatch. I don't really know. But I really enjoyed myself with it, and I think that the distraction is just such a fascinating concept to explore how unable people are with coping with the idea of an apocalypse. And man, it's just such a good series for showing how stressful, how differently people would approach the idea of an apocalypse. Really, really reflective show. Really reflects a lot of my personal taste. I don't know how successful it is, but I really hope the best for this show, and I'm excited to see more. Next up is Baby Reindeer. God, what a bleak but amazing deep dive into men's mental health through the lens of Richard Gadd's own life and experience with a stalker. This is a very upsetting show. It's a very emotional show. It's a very powerful show. I've got some trigger warnings on screen now. If you don't think that you want to see this, please skip to the next timestamp. Donnie Dunn is such an unflinching reflection of Gadd's own personality, own mental state, and history with this stalker, and you really feel it come through on the screen. I know that there was a sort of big media storm surrounding this, the thing that you see at the beginning of each episode, this is a true story, and the ties to the actual stalker who inspired Martha's character. I think that there could have been more responsibility needed by Gadd and his team to separate this from real life events, but it's clear that the intent is not to encourage people to engage with these behaviours, to become part of the problem, as it were. I think that Gadd really was focusing on how messy and how uncomfortable and how visceral this experience is for him, and probably still is. It's such a fascinating show, but such a hard show to watch. The way it kind of continues to just unravel the characters as we see more and more of them, and we understand more and more of why Donnie is in this spiral of trying his best to be kind to himself, but just not being able to, and just continuing to engage with his worst behaviours. It's incredible to me, and I even describe it as a masterpiece, because it's such a difficult thing to talk about, but it inspires such a reaction that I can't just ignore it. It's such a fascinating watch. Gadd's acting in episode 6 in particular is soul-crushing. This guy has clearly had to kind of mine his own trauma to elicit such a strong performance, and I just really hope that he's in a better place than he was when this event probably initially occurred, because you really get the sort of dread, the tension, the paranoia, the general kind of feeling that he suffered a lot here, but he's also a victim to a lot of these bad instincts. And he isn't like sunshine and rainbows. He isn't flawless. Like, you can tell that there must have been so much self-reflection and so much effort put into this series, and so much reflection on these past events, that I just can't help but say that this is brilliant. It is brilliant, but it is a very hard watch. It is not something I would readily recommend to just anyone. Please, if you do see it, and if you do think that there would be topics that would be uncomfortable to you, I would seriously recommend checking content warnings regarding this series. Okay, now onto something completely different tonally. Monkie Kid. Yes, it's another LEGO show. This series is so fun. It's got some great animation, some great characters, and it goes so deep into exploring MK's psyche than I would have ever expected. Seriously, out of all of the characters that I think have experienced a ton of trauma this year that I've seen, it's funny to me that it's this little Lego guy who ends up going through so much trauma. It's actually crazy. I'm also really surprised at just how interesting the villains are, and how one of the villains uses Plato's cave, the philosophical concept, as part of their, like, motivation. Like, my god, that's so cool. Night-Headed Demon's time in the spotlight was incredibly short, but ever so sweet. You know, I wouldn't want to rank the characters, but MK number 1, Mechanic number 2, Azure Lion number 3, Monkey King 4, Sandy 5. Anyhow, yeah, I really enjoyed Monkey Kid. Tons and tons of fun. Would highly recommend if you just want something fun to watch. The humor's also just on point, and I think it really helps that. Shoot, who did the initial animation? Flying Bark, I think. Flying Bark is just masters, absolute masters of visual comedy and timing. It's so good. Season 1 had so many jokes that just cranked me up. Alright, onto something another very different tonal shift away. Moral Orel. This is such an interesting show. I've heard of this show before, I've seen some analysis on bits of it, but my goodness, it is such a superb discussion on faith mixed with this pitch black comedy. The depths that they go to exploring characters like Orel, Clay, and Reverend Putty, they're so much fun. They're so interesting, and I think I'm going to retract that. I wouldn't say they're fun, they're interesting. I'm really glad with how the story ended. The way that they do things felt really good, and if I'm entirely honest, some of the proposed plans for future seasons sound like they could have kind of undermined just how good some of this stuff was. I'm really glad that it got to the position that it was in, because it was some masterful storytelling. And it's also really ahead of its time with the social and religious commentary and politics it wants to discuss and critique. It makes absolutely clear what its stance is with so many of these things. There's literally an episode about racism where the town bend over backwards to accommodate the Figurelli family, and end up kind of revoking that because they can't be racist. It is bizarre, but it is so impressive how ahead of its time it was. It really clearly has the finger on the pulse, trying to keep an eye out for what this stuff can be and what it can mean. I don't really have much else to say. This is one of those shows that you just have to watch. I'm fairly sure it's on YouTube, I'm not certain, but I would recommend it if you're interested in that stuff. So, if you know me on Discord, you probably know that I've been talking non-stop about these two shows, but first and foremost, Jellyfish Can't Swim in the Night. God, I love this show. I made a video when this first came out, and I still just am awestruck at how deeply it does everything it wants to do, and how perfectly it executes it. I will attest that episode 1 is one of the single best episodes of an anime that can be viewed entirely as a self-contained little story. Mahiru has this tendency to shrink away whenever she has the opportunity to pursue who she wants to be or what she wants to do with her life. And you can tell that she just has this directionlessness at first. She just has no clue what direction she wants to go in, even if there are impulses and instincts that she has and she's ignoring. And I think that the rest of the series is really her getting to bloom and getting to kind of explore the different angles of who she wants to be, and this is the case with all the other characters as well. Like, so often in stories like this, the characters will either be self-assured or do actions against their nature to sort of prove their courage, or maybe even, even if they are scared, they'll do it. But with Mahiru, her tendency is always to avoid deciding, to always avoid sticking out, to always avoid being a bit weird. And I think that really affected me in a profound way, of the idea of, okay, there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong way to live your life so long as you are yourself, authentically yourself. I think that, honestly, this story has so many, queer and neurodivergent undertones. It's so much fun, and I love how it also explores people's relationship with the internet. And since it's such a contemporary modern thing, one of the characters is a VTuber, and they use that as part of their own kind of support network. That is part of who they are, and that is a way that they can express that element of their personality in a way that feels safe, that comforts them. There's so many little plot lines which involve the internet, and I know that it sounds silly that, of course the internet's going to be a part of these characters' lives, but there's a clear and quite careful effort to show that, the internet can breed positivity, and it can also breed extreme negativity in all of these characters' lives, and it's just depends on the person, depends on how it's used. Man, go watch this show. It's 12 episodes long. There might be some stuff that you aren't super big on, trust me, I understand, I get it, but if you're like me, this is just such a lovely story of 4 different artists coming together to produce something that they think will truly resonate with both themselves and with others. So much fun. I love this show. The next one is a show I never expected to love. This being Oi Tonbo. Tonbo? This is a great show which is slow, it's philosophical, but it's steady. It's discussing the main character Tombo's ideology about golf. She starts off as this basically wild child who basically just treats golf as a game, as something she can just sort of do whenever, as a way of honouring her deceased parents. But as she and her mentor figure, Igarashi, Igaiga is what he's sometimes called, it just allows her to grow not just in her abilities, but also in her mentality surrounding golf. And I find that really cool, because so often in stories, it's not the mentality that it's focused on, it's your ability isn't good enough, you need to get better at this sport. Tonbo already has great instincts, it's just, she just has this mental block of not wanting to treat the game seriously, of not wanting to leave, of not wanting to leave her comfort zone and fly the nest. There's a really great discussion of how experience in the wider world isn't compulsory, how it is ultimately her choice on whether or not she wants to stay in what is safe, what is comfortable, and what is familiar, or striking out into the wider world. And I find that so much fun. It is not a show that I would recommend if you are a fan of tons of high energy adrenaline. This is a slow show, it's got lots of golf terminology which I don't understand, and it takes its time. But I really like it. Recently, the second half of Season 1, or possibly Season 2, it's a bit unclear, is almost come to an end. But I've been really enjoying just how methodical it is. And the new characters have been lots of fun. And honestly, anything after those initial 12 or so episodes just feels like additional content. The story that I was excited to read isn't over, but the majority of the legwork has been put in already. If you do want to see it, please check it out on Amazon Prime. This show has not been given any marketing, but my god, it deserves all the love it can get. I absolutely love all of the characters, but Subara is the absolute GOAT. She is so cool. Alright, next up, Attack on Titan. Yeah, it was real good. Jokes aside, I watched this with my housemates, and my goodness, this was an absolute roller coaster of a story. I'm really glad to have watched it with them, and I don't really know if there's much I can give beyond just praising it and how it tackles so many different themes and how it effortlessly just grows the world and just constantly engages me with this kind of interesting discussion surrounding its topics, the lethality of the world. There's so much there that I kind of get a bit overwhelmed. I'm probably going to rewatch it at some point, but I am absolutely so happy that I got to experience it with a group of friends just as we watched it, along with people on Discord that I talked to about the series. It was so much fun trying to speculate. It's a great show to go in blind. I absolutely loved it. Okay, next up, One Piece fan letter. My goodness, Ishitani does it again. I am so impressed with everyone who is involved in making this episode. Seriously, I do not know how it is possible for this crew to keep making this amazing level of stuff. There was so much humor, so much emotion, so much soul in this special, and it really makes you think that these people know the soul of One Piece. They know what makes One Piece amazing. And I love the kind of meta aspect that this is a special about all the lives that the Straw Hats have directly or indirectly impacted. And I absolutely love how each of the different characters seem to be almost like different types of fans. Like, you've got people invested in one character's storyline, you've got the fans of the music, you've got the theorizers, you've got the power scalers, and oh my god, that power scaling scene at the bar was so fucking dumb. I love it. I love all of, like, the different little escalations where it's like, yeah, but what about this guy? No, what about this guy? And then some other guy comes in and just is like, actually, this guy is completely unrelated to your discussion. That's the best one. And they're like, fuck off, man. It's not that guy. Oh my god, I love fan letter so much. It's also one of the few single episodes of anime which has made me cry multiple times. The Marine Brothers plotline, the one with the Marine who experienced all of this pain, sorrow, and heartbreak during the Marineford War. I loved his speech about if I survive this war, if I live long enough, can I make a profound impact on someone else, similar to how Luffy has made an impact on him? Like, man, this is the kind of stuff I live for stories for, because, yeah, that is ultimately what a lot of One Piece is. It is Oda and these characters and this world leaving profound impact on people who can then continue the chain of legacy and appreciation and love. And I don't think I can put it into words how good this is. I don't even know. Nami fan was so cute. I also think that final few scenes were just so beautiful. What a wonderful story. Keep your hands off Eizouken. This one I could do fairly quickly. It's just a really creative story. It has this childlike whimsy that really taps into that kind of childish love of just exploring, of imagining stuff, along with legit, like, really technical knowledge about animation. The characters are just endlessly charming. They ooze personality. And even, like, just the environment design of, like, the town and, like, the city and, like, the school. It's just so weird but really cool. I love it. It's such a nice show, and I'm really thankful for Trish, for recommending it to me. Ranma 1/2. So, I've never experienced Ranma, but this was so much fun. It always gets me to smile, even when some elements feel a little bit sort of tropey, weird or dated, because it feels like the origin point for these tropes. And the way that Mappa animated it just oozes with charm. It's so much fun. And it's just so sincere. Ranma, Akane, and Ryoga are so much fun as a trio. I just love how everyone in the show is just so fucking dysfunctional and stupid. You just have the most absurd stuff going on. And the voice actors just absolutely kill it. It just never lets up. And they really highlight just how great the comedy is. It has made me incredibly excited to try reading the manga at some point. Because I am almost certain they are not going to be adapting the entire show in a reasonable time span. Brilliant show. So much fun, so colourful. Fellowship of the Ring. I'm only midway through this, but this provides such a fun contrast to The Hobbit, which is this more light-hearted venture with elements of darkness. Meanwhile, I would say that this feels magical, but in a darker hue, because ultimately this is a pretty dire story. This is Frodo having to exile himself in order to potentially save the Shire and save the Hobbits and save the world. Even the sort of mentor, parental figures such as Gandalf and Tom Bombadil, they have so much less power than they had in The Hobbit. Like, Gandalf feels human in the sense of he has flaws, he has weaknesses. He cannot be the one to hold the ring. He even tells Frodo this, like, no, you can't foist this responsibility. You have to be the one, because if I take it, chaos will ensue. Honestly, this story has a certain bleakness to it, but it's still fun. I'm really excited to see more of Aragorn, and I'm currently midway through the Council of Elrond chapter, and I'm so curious to see what happens with Gollum in particular, because I have heard, I know what happens near to the end, but I'm so curious to see how we get there and what else might happen. Frodo is such a cool character. I love how different he is to Bilbo, because Bilbo is very easy to love. He's charismatic, he's quite open, quite joyous. But Frodo is far less that. He's quiet, he's contemplative, but he also reacts to things differently to Bilbo. While Bilbo showed Gollum a lot of mercy in sparing him in the cave because he was this kind of pitiful creature, Frodo's initial reaction on hearing this is, yeah, but you should have killed him. He believes, I don't know wholeheartedly is the right word, but he is a less morally righteous character. He's a bit slower on the uptake. He's a little bit more reluctant, I think, than Bilbo was, because Bilbo always had this Tookish instinct. I think that Frodo has had to kind of really sort of pluck up the courage for it. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. This was recommended by my friend Finn, and it's this really sweet, really short story about a seagull who has this insatiable desire to experiment with his true passion and love of flying. And it's really cool because it's regardless of what happens to Jonathan, he is constantly, regardless of how he tries to act or how he tries to think, he can't help himself but simply keep pushing at this thing, this piece of knowledge and this activity which gives him so much joy and which he has such a passion to try and improve his worth in. I think that this is just so awesome because this insatiable desire is basically what makes him become enlightened. He goes to another realm full of passionate people who also love flying. And even despite basically becoming enlightened and becoming a god at flying, he can't help but be humble, be be kind and spur others to try and do what he did. One of the things that this book makes clear is that despite some of Jonathan's qualities almost seeming kind of messianic, almost like Jesus, he also is incredibly down to earth. He doesn't believe himself to be better. He doesn't believe himself to be more. He sees himself and sees the effort he put in and says, anyone can come like me. Anyone can do this. And I think that makes his choice to go back to Earth as this teacher, where he experienced the extreme pushback he already experienced in life, but now in this role of teaching and with the self-confidence to know that his path isn't wrong. It's just so cool. It's just in his nature to think about flying, to try and teach others to fly. It's so cool. Steven Universe Art and Origins. Now, this is such an insightful book. I feel so privileged that the university library I've got has this and a bunch of other art books. And I think the thing that really sets this art book out from others, which are just, other art books are pretty. Other art books have these beautiful illustrations made during the development of shows, of TV shows, of films. But I really love how in-depth the explanation of the production pipeline of Steven Universe is. This isn't even something that I think it shares with the sequel book for the Steven Universe movie and future. This book feels very unique in the sense that it really fleshes out, okay, what was Rebecca Sugar's origin? What about the other major showrunners? How did they get to the position of Steven Universe? And then after that, it goes so in depth on how does the production pipeline work? What was Rebecca Sugar's correspondence with the voice actors? What's the order that things get produced in? And I love that this focus on initial development is given so much information when it's normally just brushed over in a lot of these art books, which feel like they're kind of there to more so be pretty and show off the nice art. And I just love it for that. It feels like such a unique way to develop the idea of an art book and to really give an appreciation for the story and the production. I'd recommend it if you're a Steven Universe fan, or if you're just curious about the animation progress and production as a whole, because it is incredibly emotionally intelligent, incredibly fun. The segments that stick out most in my mind was Rebecca Sugar, the correspondence with Ruby's voice actor, and how, I can't remember, I think she applied to do a different character's role, but then later got brought back to do Ruby, and there was this beautiful little letter that the two of them shared, and it's just so sweet. There were art challenges that the Crewniverse sort of partook in to kind of design ideas and to just get the creative juices flowing, and it just sounds like such a passionate, interesting atmosphere. And I also love how Rebecca Sugar was very clear in the idea of having voice actors who weren't just known for voice acting roles. There were singers, there were theatre performers. Zach Callison, the voice of Steven, I think he was trained in music beforehand. He knew how to sing, he knew how to use his voice, but I believe that was his first time actually doing voice acting. So yeah, this is just an invaluable book. I can't recommend it enough. Mouse. So I have not experienced a ton of books revolving around World War II, but Mouse is such a frank and real depiction of basically art retelling his father's story, Vladik's story, during World War II. And I just find it so human and fascinating, particularly in how Vladik isn't really smoothed over at all. He's miserly, he's standoffish, he's distant, he's very forceful with how he thinks Art should live his life, when Art is a grown man in his 30s, I'm pretty sure, at the time. And it's so interesting how all of these qualities which seem inherent to Vladik, he had these before the war, they weren't product of the war. These were things that he's always seemed to have. How these qualities ended up kind of helping him in the war, because he needed some of these more sort of shrewd and careful qualities to get around and survive in the way he did. But there's also this like looming feeling of tragedy at every point in the story. Like, even if you don't like Vladek as a person, even if he's human, and you really get the sense that he lost a lot in this war. The people of that generation lost so much of their identity, so much of their home, so much of their family, and it's just so interesting. And I think that art depicts a real feeling of despair in the mice with this like mouth shape that they have, this very particular mouth shape when they're crying, where it looks like the character's almost kind of wailing, and it's pretty haunting. I really hope I get to read some of Art's other stuff, because, man, this is such a brilliant and human experience, and the ending is just really, I don't know if bittersweet's the right word, it's just bitter. It's so fascinating to see someone experience these things in their real life, and then through the process of exploring him understanding this story, making the story also about that, it is an incredible piece of work, and it more than earns its keep as one of these incredibly essential, incredibly informative retellings of life during the war. Best before digital archives and free culture. So this year I had to do my university dissertation. I ended up deciding to write it on the preservation of digital media, specifically games and animation, particularly on the internet. And these 3 books basically acted as my foundations. They were the cornerstones on my discussion around digital media preservation and copyright law. They all really helped expand my mind and my views on these topics, providing so many interesting case studies and things for me to think about. I think that they all managed to explore these things in such different ways and get me to think in more creative, more interesting ways than I would have come to naturally. And sometimes they just are very good at verbalizing what you might already have thought, but it explains it in a way that really just clicks with me, and I really like that. Knights of the Wandering Castle. This is legit one of the best comics I've ever read. It only ever gets better on reread, and you come to understand the characters and the world a lot more once you have the context of some of the stuff later on in the story. I also really like how you understand the characters more, and you can see the little moments of foreshadowing you may have totally overlooked before, because there's some really innocuous minute details which end up being quite important foreshadowing later. I'm so curious to see how all of this will happen, how all of this will shape out, because the story is currently in a really interesting direction. If you are craving more of this story, subscribe to Lunny's Patreon so that you can read the extra chapters as they're being kind of made and released, sort of an early access. And yeah, Looney has a really strong character writing ability. He writes these really strong interactions that immediately clues you in about the personalities, the beliefs, the eccentricities of all of these characters. And there's quite a lot of subtextual stuff that you can kind of read into, like expressions, little lines, little moments. Yeah, I really want to make a video on Snowy Sophia Frost, and I think there is so much about some of these characters which will, I'm assuming, get revealed sooner or later. It's kind of hard for me to pick which characters I'm the most excited to see more of. I think Samson, Blank, Amihan, and Charlotte. I think all of them are prime for all sorts of interesting directions in their stories. And yeah, completely unrelated to the actual story side of things, the art is just delicious. The magic and fighting effects have so much weight to them. The character expressions, man, the character expressions are so good. Even with less emotive characters like Blank, you still get a lot of the sense of what this character might be thinking, even if they never kind of verbalize it. And I really like that. Next up is a story which has kind of dominated my life, Hat Atelier. This is an amazingly written story. It's got amazing art, brilliant writing, brilliant paneling, presentation, everything. It's incredible how meteoric the rise of Hat Atelier has been for me. Everything just clicks together so perfectly for me. I love the world, I love the story. It takes elements of stories I love in Harry Potter and other things that I grew up with, and then just effortlessly ties them to societal issues, to drawing, and the artistic experience of being an artist, of loving art, of experiencing art. And oh man, if this is someone's first manga, I think this could literally change your life. It's changed mine a fair bit. Like, there are so many applicable little lessons and advice. One of my favourites is one of the newer chapters, but it's fairly non-specific, I'll keep it vague. There is the discussion about sort of using how do you use your abilities? How do you best make the most of your situation? And it was the idea of, okay, imagine what kind of person you are in a month. Imagine what kind of person you are in a few weeks' time, rather than trying to imagine at the end of your journey what you're going to look like. And I think that's some incredibly valuable advice for anyone at any age. Just, who do you want to be, not in the far future? Who do you want to be soon? Who do you want to be now? There's also so much discussion about your intent when making art. How do you improve your skills? How do you deal with burnout or regret or sadness? There's so much to love about this story, and I just can't wait to see the future developments, because it's a series that dips its toe into darkness without being enveloped by it. And even at its darkest moments, there's still glimmers of light, but it always feels tentative. It's played so effortlessly with tone between going from light to dark, and I just feel like there's this sort of slight sensation of there's a chance that everything could plunge into darkness at any second if certain things get revealed or if certain characters act in certain ways. And my god, I'm just so excited to see more of it. And yeah, just the themes, everything about the themes is so well written. I'm personally a massive fan of the discussion around accessibility. It's something that I don't think people tend to think all that much about unless it affects you. And it's not something I think I thought about much until this story really highlights just how difficult even the most basic of things can be. And I think that making fantasy accessible in the sense of imagining how life would act for certain people, and how would you operate, and how would you try and make the world more accommodating place for them. It's just, there is so much there. There's so much discussion around people who don't fit into the systems, people who get failed by the systems, and people who question basically authority and question the ruling class and question why are things the way that they are. And it's just so much fun. I'm so excited to see more of it. Shirahama is an absolute goat of an artist. I love the little pictures of Brush Buddy that Shirahama will post when she's going to conventions and stuff. That's just so charming. And of course, Tata is the goat. My Hero Academia. So, for those who don't know, My Hero Academia was the story that got me into both anime and manga in the first place, so tons of my current day interests and friendship groups are basically founded on this series, and now it's over. It's a surreal feeling that I'm not completely over, if I'm entirely honest. I reread the series before catching up, because I fell off the series, partly due to just how much Horikoshi was harming his health, and partly because I felt very bitter towards the story. So I reread it so that I could get a bit of a better feel for what were my real feelings towards it. There is a slight lingering resentment for me towards All For One. He really kind of steals the show heavily by the end of Act 3 and Act 2, going into Act 3. And yeah, I don't think I'm ever fully going to get over that, because it felt like the story was primed to go in one direction, it was heading in that direction, and then it suddenly swerves. And I think that could have been done well, but the way it was laid out just didn't appeal to me. But I'm not going to deny that Horikoshi is one of my favourites and one of my, one of the most talented creators, both in his writing and his art. He uses parallels in this really interesting way. Typically with character journeys, I think the way that certain mentors parallel one another, how student-mentor relationships can be different from one another but still all be kind of going in the same direction, like comparing Deku and All Might's journey to something like Tokiyami and Hawk. There's commonalities whilst also having a lot of differences. He's great at keeping his world and characters fleshed out as both he and the writing of these characters mature over time. I think in many ways the ending far outpaced what he was able to write because of it being a shonen, because of it being a very traditional show in some senses. But in other senses there is like some very messy, complex social issues which I don't think Horikoshi was able to fully resolve. He was trying his best, and I think under the circumstances and with the page time he had, I think he did a phenomenal job. But there are definitely some lingering issues that I'm not entirely certain I like, and I feel like there might have been ways around it, but he made me feel something, and I really can't thank him enough for that. Maybe I'll make a video on it, I don't really know. It's been a few months now, I'll probably settle my feelings on it sooner or later. But yeah, I really hope that Horikoshi takes a massive rest, because that man has been working himself to the bone, and I just want to see him happy. Next up is Look Back. Man, Look Back is such a great adaptation. So I got to see this in the big screen twice, and it was such an incredible honor just to be in the presence of this film, because I just love everything about it. It just feels so personal. And the original manga one-shot and this still maintain that feeling, even if it is a far more collaborative effort this time. I'm not the first one to point out how Fujino and Kiyomoto almost act as two sides of Fujimoto, literally their names, like the first half of Fujino and the last half of Kiyomoto, they make Fujimoto's name. And I love how they kind of represent two totally different paths, life experiences, and maybe even mentalities of Fujimoto, if you want to kind of analyze it in that way. I think it's just an incredibly well animated, incredibly well voiced, incredibly well scored film, with just everything hitting the right emotional beats, having the right amount of emphasis. Man, that scene of Fujino running in the rain is so interesting, and it's such a Fujimoto way to express joy. Like, rain is, used with pathetic fallacy to kind of give this sense of melancholy. Meanwhile, here it's almost this sense of liberation and of excitement and happiness and eagerness. Like the way she runs, the way she's sort of got her face all scrunched up. This is like not a typical depiction of what a joyful character would be experiencing, but it works so perfectly, particularly for how Fujimoto writes and draws, and just the story as a whole. It's her kind of losing that inhibition and losing that feeling of inferiority to Kimoto, because Kimoto was so inspired by her. And that was just such a charming film. They might have leaned a little heavy on the emotional music near the climax, but it really does make sense. It's the kind of catharsis, it's the release of all those emotions. And yeah, it just inspires you to create, if nothing else. It's just such a good show. Okay, I've tried to avoid anything which is too related to rewatches or re-experiences, but Paddington and Paddington 2, the Paul King Paddington films, I just have to mention them, because they are so great. I rewatched them in order to be prepared for Paddington in Peru. I kind of knew in the back of my mind that film was never going to match with these two, but you know what? It was an excuse to watch them again. I'm fine with that. Paul King and his team just do such a phenomenal job with this. There's this childlike whimsy in the way that Paddington interacts with this world. There's such a kind of loose grip of reality that they can kind of fudge things and make it kind of seem a little bit silly and a little bit out there, whilst having that childlike charm and still feeling real enough. Sequences like Paddington in the bath going down the stairs, the train chase, him climbing up the vent with vacuums, or flying with an umbrella. Like these all feel like ideas that a child would come up with, and they get explored in such fun ways. There's so much striking visual imagery and so much vivid imagination and emotion on display, particularly in Paddington 2. The image of Paddington sitting by a prison window writing to his aunt about how he's okay and how he's in a new home, it's heartbreaking. And like, even when just listening to the music, I can imagine that scene. And that is, I think, part of what makes the Paddington films just that special. They just hit so perfectly. I love the Britishness of their humour. Like, there's a kind of matter-of-factness to the fact that these characters are talking to a bear, and this bear's just doing regular human things. It is so good. I love its kind of social commentary. It does a lot by not being any one thing. And in comparison, Paddington 3 just doesn't have the sauce. It never really got out of the shadow of those first two. It doesn't have the humour, it doesn't quite the sort of charming editing, it doesn't have the commentary that the others films do, because it's trying to be an adventure film. And I'm okay with that, but it definitely doesn't compare. Like, there's some lovely scenes at the beginning and the end. I always like seeing how they utilise the differences of the Brown family to kind of show what has happened since the previous film. That's been a really fun aspect of all of the film. There is also there's just something lacking. It just doesn't connect the same. But I do also really like that scene at the end of Paddington in Peru. I think that Paddington kind of getting to having this resolve of I've got my tribe and I've got my family is such a lovely and sweet thing, and I can 100% see the writers of the first two films being the ones who wrote scenes like that, where it just has that emotional purity and sweetness that I think kind of defines Paddington as a character. Yeah, I really enjoyed those. Next up, The Taste of Things. This is a masterfully intricate film, and it's probably, if I had to point out a film which is probably the most pretentious film, I guess, it's probably this. I watched it in cinemas, it was in French, it had subtitles, but man, I fucking loved it. Both this and Dungeon Meshi gave me this kind of newfound appreciation for food as an art form, a form of expression, and just something beyond just being, it's nice to eat food. It really helped me appreciate food as something more. I really like the extended scenes of cooking and eating, because it shows just how, it beautifully demonstrates how people can be connected through this dedication, through this passion. Taste of Things was absolutely beautiful, highly underrated film. I loved how it does things. That extended sequence at the beginning might at first kind of confuse you, it might be a bit weird, but seriously, trust me, just stick with it. It is absolutely beautiful. Alright, time for some rapid fire rounds where I've only got a single bullet point. I'm going to try and get through these as fast as possible. Robot Dreams. This is one of the best non-dialogue films I've ever seen. I'll never see September the same way again. Great film. Ernest and Celestine. One of the most charming films France has ever made. I feel like a kid again. I love these two. They are so charming. Whack Fu. This goes in so many wild directions. The sheer amount of reflection that the characters go through in Season 3 is absolutely insane. Got some good jokes, got some bad jokes, got some absolutely beautiful visual design. Another one of the most charming stories France has ever created. Hugo is the best. The Muppet Movie. Kermit is such a dreamer, he's just like me for real. Rainbow Connection is a pure gold song, and this is just so much fun. Millennium Actress. This is my first Satoshi Kon film, and my god, Satoshi Kon is so good at playing with time and perception and my heart, and I don't have anything else to say about Millennium Actress. Go watch it, it's really, really, really good. Perfect Blue. This is my second Satoshi Kon film. Dear god, this film broke my brain a bit watching. Feels incredibly relevant nowadays. It's so far ahead of its time. I wasn't even born when it was made. I don't understand how you make something like this. It's just so cool. Bug Fables. This is an incredibly charming game with an incredibly charming set of characters and world. I really hope we get some kind of sequel. Also, Kabu is the best. I love him. He's such a little guy. And I love Paper Mario inspired stuff. Alright, that's the rapid fire over. Maybe I should have done that for more of these so that this video isn't going to be really, really long. Whisper of the Heart. This is an incredibly heartfelt movie which lacks a lot of Ghibli's usual fantastical elements. And I think I'm really happy with that. It allowed me to connect with it on a far deeper, far more personal level. Shizuku has this immense pressure on herself to make herself feel worthy of love, and it's just so impactful. I really like that scene where her dad sits her down as she's kind of getting more and more enraptured by this project, and he sort of tells her, do you really want to do this? And she's like, yeah. And then he kind of says, alright. It's clear he's not 100% happy with it, but it's so interesting the way he kind of accepts it, but he also says that if you don't do it, if it doesn't work out, then, this is on you. It's such a mature way to handle the situation, and I don't think I've ever seen a story kind of approach chasing your dreams in this way of, acceptance and approval and encouragement, while still having that sense of trepidation and that sense of accountability. Because, doing this stuff doesn't guarantee success. It won't guarantee make her happy. It won't get her into a good school. This is a passion that she is choosing to follow, that she is choosing to try and foster, because she's seen how much other people care for their different things that they want to improve their craft. The country roads scene was absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely loved that. It was some great storytelling. The Wild Robot. This is possibly my film of the year. I've made it absolutely clear to many of my friends that I'm a sucker for robot stories, especially ones which explore different aspects of exploring and sort of expressing humanity. Roz getting to explore these themes of motherhood and her growing connection to the people in her life, so fascinating. And I really love how she kind of gets othered at the beginning by the animals, and then she gets othered later on by the destroyed Yoz unit. It's so interesting because she's nothing like anyone around her, and there's a real sense of empathy towards all the characters here. I was really surprised at the animals. I kind of thought they were just going to be a cheap gimmick, but they ended up being great. The migration scene got me to tear up, and man, the film was just so good. I also love the humour. Pedro Pascal, I can't remember Roz's voice's name. They all did beautiful, beautiful job. I just love robot humour, man. I think that you can do so much with this stuff. And you can tell that a lot of the filmmakers who worked on How to Train Your Dragon were on this project because the environments, man, the environments are so beautiful. That's one of the things which I think is underrated about How to Train Your Dragon a lot, is just how good the environment design is. It is just so charming and so sweet, and this film was just brilliant. I loved it. Alright, we're near the end now. Next up is Transformers 1. This was my first ever intro to the Transformers franchise. I'd seen a clip of the Michael Bay films before this. That was literally it. I've never touched Transformers before, but man, this was a fun little origin story. I love how believable Orion and D60. I love how believable Orion Pax and D16's relationship is. There's some really, really flashy action scenes. Sorry about that. And the chemistry of the different characters really helped this film stick out, because it could have easily been a very kind of by the books film, but the way that they explored the characters and the way that the characters so naturally bounced off each other just really helped everything just stick the landing. I even think that Bumblebee got funnier later on, because at the beginning he was just kind of, oh, he's the funny one, but there was some legit really good jokes near the end. I loved how he was just hacking things up and just going a bit mad with power at the beginning of when he first got his laser arms. Final thing I want to talk about is Dan Kelby's character design course. So I've not really explored things like Skillshare or Domestika, which is where this character design course was. I've not really explored websites like this because I've never really sort of seen any point in doing these kind of online courses. But I think this was so great. This course was so interesting. First of all, I do want to make sure that it's clear, I'm not sponsored by these guys. I just think this course was very, very good. So, I come from a concept art background with what I've been studying in university. So, I do know quite a few of the concepts that this was discussed, because this was predominantly aimed at people getting into concept art. But if you don't come from a concept art background, this course is really great. It explains the basics in a very digestible, understandable way, with a lot of great little exercises and explanations of why we do things in a certain way, and why iteration is important, why trying out new things is important, and what you can do with caricature and exaggeration and proportion. This course is absolutely fantastic. If it's on sale, you should be able to get it for about £5. And here's the character I made from it. I would ideally want to keep trying out new courses so that I can keep getting better at these sort of different skills. It's just so much fun, and I'm so happy with it. If I had to define one thing about this year and the stuff I've found and the stuff I've experienced, is it has really helped me begin to learn how to fly, to begin to learn how to leave my comfort zone and try things a little bit outside of just what I already like. I think that in particular films, I really tried to vary it up a little bit. I got to watch a lot of different films, which I didn't mention here. And yeah, just so many of these stories are just champions of the idea of self-improvement, of proving your worth, of trying to get better at stuff and learn and experience. And yeah, I'm just so happy about that. I also want to give a special thank you to everyone who has given me advice, who's given me support, who's suggested things, who's experienced these stories with me. I know that I've not mentioned a few. I've not mentioned watching Jujutsu Kaisen with a bunch of friends, talking about Witch Hat, talking about Attack on Titan. There's so much, man. And yeah, I can just hope that next year will be even greater. I don't really have a ton else to say, other than, yeah, I just hope that you enjoyed this video, and here's for an even better next year.